You want your headlines from Israel, don't you? Well, we're here to give them to you. I'm Rolene Marks. This is the Israel Brief brought to you by Lay of the Land, where we do exactly that. Bring you the lay of the land by bringing you those top stories making headlines in Israel. And we do that every Monday to Thursday. So let's take a look at those stories dominating the headlines right here in the Holy Land. And we begin with news that the family of the Al Jazeera journalist that was killed several months ago, Shireen Abu Akleh, met with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington. Now, this meeting was promised to the family when the Secretary of State was here just several weeks ago with US President Biden. The family are also going to meet with lawmakers. They are insisting on yet another independent and thorough investigation as to who was responsible for firing the fatal shot that killed the war correspondent. Now, the family members accused the United States of allowing Israel to kill with impunity. And of course, this is a statement that Israel will have great objections to. Not only was Abu Akleh a war correspondent and understood all too well the risks that are taken when you do cover a live combat event, but Israel does not target and assassinate journalists. Not to mention that two examinations have already been carried out. One by the Palestinian coroner when he conducted an autopsy, and his conclusions was that it was inconclusive to tell who fired the fatal shot. And the other was by the Americans, which was held at the US Embassy in Jerusalem, and their conclusion was exactly the same. It is absolutely inconclusive. Now, the IDF have said that they will continue an investigation. This will be an operational investigation, not a criminal investigation, but reiterated that if the shot did come from the side of the IDF, it was a tragic mistake and absolutely not intentional. We have to wonder, are we ever going to see the end to this very, very tragic saga? South Africa's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Naledi Pandor, has caused a great stir in Israel, as yesterday when she addressed the Palestinian heads of missions, she said that she believes Israel should be declared an apartheid state and will appeal to the General Assembly to ensure that it conducts some kind of investigation. Now, this is part of Pandor's almost obsessive hatred of the Jewish state. In fact, as the foreign minister of the Republic of South Africa, she only seems to have one foreign policy agenda item, and that is to have Israel's observer status at the African Union expelled. Now, Israel has observer status, which means that Israel can sit in the room when resolutions are being discussed, but cannot vote or propose a resolution themselves. This is more of a diplomatic win for the state of Israel, as it brings Israel into the AU to network and to talk to various representatives. The South African Jewish Board of Deputies responded with a very, very strongly worded statement accusing the minister of having an obsessive vendetta against the state of Israel and for really exposing her true colors by ignoring the concerns of Jewish citizens of South Africa, as well as the Israeli side of the story. The South African Zionist Federation also weighed in and said, it was quite telling that the minister wears a kafiyeh, an item of clothing long worn by those who call for the extermination or the destruction of the state of Israel, and also said that she is pushing a Palestinian agenda ahead of the interests of the South African people. Meanwhile, today, Prime Minister Yair Lapid confirmed that he had met with Jordan's King Abdullah at the King's Palace in Amman. The two leaders spoke for what is believed to have been quite a long time and discussed regional cooperation and growth, as well as a two-state solution which must include promoting the interests of the Palestinians. This is quite a momentous meeting between the two leaders, and the one thing that the Jordanian king is committed to is ensuring that the Palestinian cause is represented. However, over the last couple of months, the warm ties between Israel and Jordan are getting warmer with more and more areas of cooperation. We go back to the United Nations now. I know it makes my blood pressure rise as well. And a human rights investigator by the name of Milun Kotari has said that the social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, all the rest, are run by the Jewish lobby and NGOs. Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds like a very ugly, ancient stereotype that Jews have been dealing with for a very long time, and that is controlling the world, controlling the media. He was addressing Mondovas, which is probably one of the most rabid anti-Israel publications, and he said Israel has no interest in ending the occupation and insist on persistent discrimination against the Palestinians. He also accused Jews in Israel of overusing the term anti-Semitism. Well, Mr. Kotari, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's not a swan. And our final story takes us to Germany, where a spokesperson for the German Interior Ministry announced earlier today that the German government will pay the families of the 11 Israeli victims of the Munich massacre at the Munich Olympics in 1972 compensation. The spokesperson said that it's the desire to have the serious consequences of that horrific event given to the family in material terms. This September will mark 50 years since the massacre by Palestinian Black September terrorists, which saw 11 Israeli athletes brutally murdered and one West German police officer killed in the attempts to free the hostages. Now, this brings us to the end of today's edition of the Israel Brief. Don't forget, if you miss your daily edition of the Israel Brief, not to worry, we've got you covered. All of our content goes onto our website at www.layoftheland.online, as well as our original articles. And if you would like to write for Lay of the Land on a variety of topics, don't forget you can contact us via our website. Our Facebook page is at Lottel Site. Our community there is growing. We would so love it if you join us by liking us or following us, and of course sharing our content. Our YouTube channel is at the Israel Brief. Many of you view us on YouTube, and we would so appreciate it if you help us get news from Israel out to the masses by clicking on that red subscribe button and, of course, liking and sharing our content. And don't forget, we're on Twitter at Lay of the Land 5. I'm Rolene Marks. This is the Israel Brief, and join me again tomorrow as we wrap up your top stories.